My name is Alison Theriault, and I am a fourth-year pharmacy student at the University of Waterloo. I'm about to graduate and will be a pharmacist in the next few months. I first got involved with Shinerama when I was a first-year student at Wilfrid Laurier University. That was way back in 2006. And I loved it so much as a first-year student as part of O Week. The following year I volunteered to be on the Shinerama team as a volunteer. And then the following year I coordinated Shine Day, and in my fourth year at Laurier I had the absolute honor of being the Shinerama coordinator. I loved my experience with Shinerama so much, and because I ended up staying in the Waterloo area after I graduated from Laurier, I wanted to stay involved with all of the incredible families that I had had a chance to meet. So I now volunteer with the local chapter of Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and I work with them as the secretary for the board of directors, and I also sit on the Great Strides Walk committee to help plan one of our biggest fundraisers for the year. What exactly is cystic fibrosis, and how do you describe cystic fibrosis? I've broken it down into an acronym that can help you remember 7 key things about cystic fibrosis. So each letter represents one aspect of the disease that you can remember. Now the first letter is G, and G is for genetic. Now cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease, so both parents have to be carrying the defective cystic fibrosis gene, and they have a 25% chance of having a child with cystic fibrosis. Now what the actual underlying defect means is that there's a misfolding of a protein that ends up in the cells that line things like your airways, your intestines, and your pancreas, among other things. So normally in these cells, there's this protein that acts in the cell wall, or in the cell membrane, and it allows for the flow of electrolytes in and out of the cell. But in cystic fibrosis, the genetic defect means that that protein doesn't fold properly, or it doesn't insert at the right place on the membrane. So the flow of electrolytes back and forth is disrupted, and when the flow of electrolytes is disrupted, the flow of water is also disrupted. So in the things like your airways, that means that the water that's in your cells doesn't get out of your cell into the area where you breathe in the air. And there's also these cells that secrete mucus. So when you have all these cells secreting mucus, but you're not getting that water to water it down, the mucus becomes really thick and sticky and builds up. So it can be really hard to clear out your lungs and makes it harder to breathe. In other organs like your intestines or your pancreas, it can inhibit absorption of nutrients, and it can stop your pancreas from secreting the enzymes that your body needs to digest all of its food. So you can just imagine if all of these different cells in your body have malfunctioning proteins, it can really throw off the water balance, and that makes this thick, sticky mucus that causes all of these problems. Now H is for how it looks. On the outside, cystic fibrosis looks like any other person. By looking at someone, you would never really know that they have cystic fibrosis. A few years ago, Cystic Fibrosis Canada put out a campaign that said cystic fibrosis is like drowning on the inside. And that's basically what it is. You can't see any difference on the inside, or on the outside, but on the inside, you can just imagine your lungs, your intestines, your pancreas are full of this mucus that makes it difficult to breathe, to digest your food, and to absorb all the nutrients you need. So people with cystic fibrosis end up with chronic infections in their lungs because the bacteria that get into the lungs can't get out because it gets stuck in all of that mucus. People with cystic fibrosis often have trouble gaining weight because they're not able to digest all of their nutrients that they need, or absorb all of the nutrients that they need. So there's a variety of ways that cystic fibrosis can look in a person, and there's thousands of different mutations that have been identified, and each mutation presents a little bit differently. So no two people with cystic fibrosis ever are the exact same, and that's what makes cystic fibrosis a challenging disease to manage, because not everyone has the same symptoms and can take all of the same medications. Now the next letter is I, and I is for infections. Like I mentioned, because you have so much mucus in your lungs, when you breathe in bacteria, normal people without cystic fibrosis can just cough out mucus and it doesn't bother them. But because your lungs are so thick and sticky with that mucus, the bacteria actually gets stuck in there. And bacteria can be really dangerous and can cause a lot of respiratory infections that can be troublesome for people with cystic fibrosis. And unfortunately, when you have chronic infections, that often means chronic antibiotics. And as a pharmacist, I know that that's never a good thing. And that's because when you take chronic antibiotics, if you use them for a long period of time, the bugs get smart, and oftentimes the antibiotics stop working. So if you get sick once and take one antibiotic, the next time you get sick and you try and use that same antibiotic, it might not work. It probably will, but it might not if these bugs are really smart and have been able to adapt. So you have to be very careful about when you choose to use which antibiotics, especially in cystic fibrosis, because infections are so common. You have to make sure you stay healthy to try and get as few infections as possible so that you don't have to worry about which antibiotics are you going to be on down the road. Now, T is for therapies. So when you have all of this mucus in your lungs, you're having trouble breathing, you need medications to help you breathe better. So a lot of people with cystic fibrosis end up using inhaled medications once or twice a day, sometimes more if they're actually sick, like if they have a cold or something like that. And these drugs can help open up the airways, can help break up that mucus so that then they can cough it out and help them breathe a little bit better. There's often a lot of vitamins that have to be taken as well because you're not absorbing them properly from your food. You have to take them as a supplement, things like vitamin A, D, E, and K. That's a very common supplement for a lot of people with CF. And then again, like I mentioned, the chronic antibiotics. So a lot of times, even if you're not sick, sometimes you have to be taking antibiotics just to help control the underlying infection, even if you're not showing any symptoms. But then when you do get sick, you have to up the dose and do it 2, sometimes 3 times a day. So it's definitely a big medication burden. On top of all of those things, there's enzymes that have to be taken to help digest food, and there's physical therapy that has to be done. So you'll probably see people with cystic fibrosis, if they have any symptoms in their lungs, they end up having to do chest physiotherapy once or twice a day, and it can take anywhere from half an hour to 2 hours if they're going through a rough respiratory infection. So it's a huge burden on your day because you're actually spending 2 to 4 hours actually just taking your medications and doing your physiotherapy to make sure you can stay healthy. And that's before you even think about showering and getting ready for your day and studying for your exams and working and all of these things. But it's just part of life when you have cystic fibrosis. Now, E is for enzymes. Because your pancreas has this mucus in it, a lot of times it gets blocked and it can't secrete the digestive enzymes that your body needs to break down its food. So when you eat or drink something and you have cystic fibrosis and you're having trouble digesting your food, you have to take enzymes in little pills. And this can range from anywhere from 1 pill to 5 or 6 pills or even more, depending on what you're eating and how big your meal is. So you can just imagine what kind of a burden that adds to all of your other medications that you're already taking. Now the second last letter is R, and R is for real life examples. Now at orientation week, there's something called Shine Time, and you'll have a chance to meet a lot of people that have cystic fibrosis or family members of people who are affected by cystic fibrosis. And so if you can remember a few real life examples of what it's like to live with cystic fibrosis, that's the best way to understand what this disease is all about. It can mean anything from a 4-year-old who has to go to kindergarten and take 20 pills a day to a 40-year-old who takes 50 pills a day to try and stay healthy. So all of these different examples are really helpful for understanding what the disease actually is and why it's so important for us to fundraise to help find a cure or a control for the disease. Now F is the last letter, and F stands for future care, and that's where you guys come in, and that's why Shinerama makes such a big difference for Cystic Fibrosis Canada, that can help to fund research to find a cure or control for cystic fibrosis, can help fund the clinics that help people with CF across Canada, and all sorts of different things. There have been huge strides made in the fight against cystic fibrosis. Since Shinerama first began, back in the 60s, the life expectancy of someone with cystic fibrosis was around 4 years of age. Now in Canada, the median life expectancy for someone with CF is 49 years old. And Canada is a huge hub for cystic fibrosis research. It's a really cool time to be involved with cystic fibrosis and Shinerama because there's so many great things coming out right now. And what we do with Shinerama and how we fundraise during orientation week is a huge part of the money that can go towards helping to save lives down the road. So I said I was going to give you an acronym to help you remember what cystic fibrosis is all about, but I gave you the letters out of order. If you reorder the letters that I told you about, you have F-I-G-H-T-E-R, fighter. And if you remember nothing else from this video, just remember that people with cystic fibrosis are fighters. They fight every day to keep themselves healthy, but we're all fighting together to raise money and awareness for cystic fibrosis research and care. And that's where Shinerama plays a huge role, and why I've chosen to stay involved with Cystic Fibrosis Canada, even though I'm no longer a Shinerama volunteer. Cystic fibrosis is a huge concern for a lot of people, and you're going to get to meet some incredible families that have been affected by this disease. Raising money through things like Shinerama for Cystic Fibrosis Canada fund clinics around Canada. They fund research to help find a cure for this disease, and I'm confident that we will find a cure for this disease in our lifetime. So it's really exciting to stay involved, and I wish you all the best this year with Orientation Week.